You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
Welcome to the 1st of January 2020 on the trail with Kevin and Scott. We're sure you guys were probably partying pretty hard last night. So wake up! This is important. Anyway. Welcome to...
You realize a whole bunch of people turn the radio going, Scott didn't mix it, and all of a sudden we say that.
You want me to redo it?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
Yeah.
So... welcome to the January 1st, 2020 episode of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott. I am the sadistic one. I am Kevin, the engineer. And, no, we are recording this a little before, so we may be in the same status. And you know what? In all honesty, we'll make sure and play our own podcast ourselves so we can wince too.
They're wincing just at the content.
Hey, 2020 is going to be a great year. We're going to make it a great year. And Scott nods his head and just goes, wait a minute, this is my role. What is he doing? Anyway.
You forgot where you left off, didn't you?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
No, I didn't. I'm just deciding the best way to put it on here. I'm the engineer, of course. I'm the guy who reads the instructions, follows them, and typically tries to use the right tools. And you are?
And I am Scott. I'm the one turning over a new leaf this year. I'm going to try to be calm, cool, collective, and straight as an arrow. Hopefully we can do this with limited humor and physical emotional damage to Kevin's psyche, because like most people, I want to lull him to a false insecurity and be able to make this show the best it possibly can for 2020. And while you're also believing all that, I have some oceanfront property in Arizona.
Well, I was going to say, quite frankly, if this is Scott, this has been the last broadcast on the trail with Kevin and Scott.
I am the slapstick part, Scott. I am the one that hunts in the creature of the night. I am the one that is constantly sitting here through the perpetual notion of Halloween is always forever. And with that note, while I will share with you what worked for me and what probably worked for Kevin, we ask that you do your research, read the instructions, and to please
follow them. That's really important. Yes. Oh, Scott would really love to have sound effects so we could have the background clapping and the screaming and go Scott.
This show is turning into a 2-ring circus.
Well, it is a New Year's Day party.
It absolutely is. We hope everyone drove safe, Ubered, took care of things. And
this is the one time where, if you're going to go out party hardy, we hope you left the Jeep at home.
Yes.
And let somebody else do the driving. Because really don't want to hear about this. Hold my beer and watch this.
We, especially with fireworks, kids. But also, too, we need all the downloads we can get. So kind of hard to download when you're dead.
Yeah. So on that morbid moment, shall we start to move the show forward?
Actually, I do. And it's glad you brought that up, because I thought it was a slick idea we cover this subject because we've kind of danced around it here and there. I think we may have touched it. But welcome to...
What Scott's talking about?
2020 and I still can't talk.
One of his
welcome
vehicles.
to show 84.
Yep.
If I haven't already said that. But I now recently purchased the banana hammock.
84? I think it's 80.
It's 84.
Okay.
Soon to be determined. Please check the information. If it says 85, realize I messed up. And we can go from there. So anyways, I recently purchased a daily driver, a 2004 Nissan Frontier with 237,000 miles on it.
Oh, just brand new.
Yeah, exactly. I have all 27 pages of maintenance where I can prove that every oil change, differential service, tune-up, the whole 9 yards. Previous boss owned it to where when he did every time belt change, he also did a radiator and thermostat. Oh. Yeah, he was quite fastidious. But
see last show talking about the maintenance-oriented people.
Yes.
So he's one of those.
Oh, you have no idea. So, but one of the interesting things is that, when the vehicle's cold starts, it's beautiful. Not a noise. It just runs like a Swiss watch. But a couple nights ago, when I was driving it, and it was at operating temperature, and I'd been on the highway for a while, the most infinitesimal of a knock, just a tiny little knock at idle. And when I first blipped the throttle to go over a speed bump, because I have to drive slow and quiet through the park, I'm like, okay, that sounds like some lower end knock. But again, you shut the truck off, wait 2 Mississippis, turn it back on, boom, no noise.
No noise.
So I thought, well, if it was truly a knock and I had something coming apart, it would be from the very beginning. So Kevin and I got to talk about oil changes because, again, oil change at 5W30 all the time. And I'm a big fan of STP and the 4.0 liter with the extra zinc. So I usually glarb a bottle of that in there. So my question to you, Kevin, is that, we talked about discussions of oils and stuff like that. Obviously, there's no such thing as a mechanic in a can for the most part. But I'm kind of like, because it comes up, especially now with winter weights, or sorry, winter oil, whatever you want to call. I thought this would be a cool subject we talk about because 5W30 the entire length. We did some research and did some looking and stuff, and the information we came out with was actually rather cool. Okay. So I'll let you take it over for a moment.
No problem. First off, folks, just to, for those of you who are a little more detail oriented, the symptoms Scott was discussing was as he said, cold, no knocking. Higher RPMs, no knocking. Low RPMs, warm, just a faint knocking.
You can't even hear it outside the truck.
And so then it was like, does he added zinc additives? And the first thing he's saying, do I have a camshaft or a lifter issue? And the answer is, no, those noises don't follow up with those symptoms.
Right.
It to me sounds like, at first I said, well, maybe it's piston slap, a lot of wear, 200,000+ miles, you're going to have some rocking of the pistons. But that would not normally go away when you revved up. It would usually get more pronounced.
Right.
What exists at low RPM warm temperatures? Well, if you have a little bit of additional bearing clearance in your main bearings or your connecting rod bearings, at cold start, your oil is a thicker viscosity because it's cold. It's able to support a larger gap clearance and not run out, before it floats the bearing material off of the crank material. At higher RPMs, your pump is actually putting out more volume and able to keep up with a larger leak, i.e. the gap between the connecting rods and the edges of the crank and the main bearings and the edges of the main journals on the crank.
Right.
Oil gets out there. That's where it gets out of the bearing. And so, because you're pumping it in faster, you can still float the bearings because that's literally what bearings do is they ideally float on a cushion of oil.
Right.
But in that, I'm warm, so my oil's at my thinnest viscosity that it will be, and I'm at low RPM, so my pump maybe is a little worn and isn't putting out as much flow as it should be. That combination of low flow, low viscosity, and a bigger bearing gap, I'm not saying failed, just bigger, leads to the knock symptom that fits in that band that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So he was saying, okay, well, are we into engine overhaul? Do I got to replace the pump? I
haven't done it yet, but I asked about just squirting a big thing of a STP in there, and you're like, well, but see, and then you brought up something kind of good. It's like,
let's adjust that your oil viscosities,
increase the oil pressure.
Right. Well, it might, but it also, you really don't want to sacrifice lubricity.
Right.
Okay. So what we're looking at here is what I suggested was let's go and increase the viscosity of the oil. In other words, make it thicker, but not affect the lubricity. And some of the admixtures can change, but they don't necessarily have the same lubricity flow characteristics as the base engine oil.
Right.
They do and don't, and it varies. The easiest answer is, all right, for slight wear and slight knocks, I say, well, what you can do is you ran, what did you say the grade was?
5W30.
530.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Because you're talking about viscosity and being thicker. You broke it down a little easier for me when you talked about how when the engine oil is at its coldness. If you're getting ready to do this,
I'm getting ready to do that.
Okay.
We'll go over a discussion of the viscosity numbers.
Gotcha.
So what we talked about was I suggested trying the next oil change, keep the 5, W40.
Right.
And this leads into where you were just leading right now. All right, why do you change the 30 to 40 and the 5 left alone versus 5 to 10 or something like that? And the answer is, folks, those numbers tell you something about the viscosity behavior of a multi-grade oil. Now, I've got here for the Patreons will see it, but I've got the Valvoline technical site up, and that is not saying that Valvoline is better or worse than anybody. What it's saying is they write a really nice article.
Yeah. So we're citing them as our reference.
And they have a FAQ page on types and weights of oils that is... It's going to help me not to make a misstatement here, because this is a critical issue on the life of your Jeep. So I wanted to make bloody sure I didn't get some words mixed up or something. I did my college thesis on oils way back when.
Yeah, back when you had two choices, dyno or baby.
Not quite, but close. It was actually a thesis on the then brand new synthetic oils and where they came from and how they worked.
Well, here I am making a joke and you kill with facts.
Yeah, well, that's just who I am. All right, first thing, let's segue into what the bleep do the numbers mean.
Yeah, okay? And I struggle with that.
And the letters, okay?
Yes.
And everybody, you even did it in the intro. Oh, well, that's weight. It actually is not weight. The W actually stands for winter.
Right.
And even that term, winter, is a result, it's a colloquial term of winter. What it is those two numbers are what's critical. The first number is its cold viscosity. How thick is that oil? Now, you can get into centipoises of viscosity, and that's a lot of technical crap. But basically, let's put it in layman's term. His 5 weight, his 5W30, the stuff he's been using all along, you can read it as, all right, at cold weather, freezing temperatures, the multigrade oil will not get any thicker, okay, because we all know oil gets thicker as it gets colder.
Right.
It will not get any thicker than a straight 5W motor oil. So if you take a steel little channel ramp, say two of them side by side, and you take a beaker of 5W40 and a beaker of straight 5W, okay, 5 winter, and put them in the fridge or the freezer, and you brought them down to 0, and then tipped them both over together into the ramp.
They theoretically should flow at the same rate.
They should flow the same ramp, should spread the same way, should basically provide the same amount of lubrication. But primarily, viscosity is how it can move through the engine. So that's saying I want my oil to be very fluid at cold temperatures. That's what the 5 says. 0, you know, my daughter's little import car takes 0 weight. So at the beginning, and it's not weight. See, I even do it, but 0W. And that's because hers is a turbocharged unit, and the turbo bearings are very fine, very delicate, and they need that lubrication, especially at startup, much less when it's hot.
Yeah.
Now,
well, that's like one of our cars at work. The UX takes 0W16 oil.
yeah. So they want a very fluid oil no matter what the situation is.
Yeah.
Now, you can move the other direction to the other number.
Right.
What that means is the opposite. And I'm trying to see here if I can see what the temperature, they don't really give you the test temperatures. They vary.
Yeah.
But a 30 weight oil, a 5W30 at, I'm going to grab a number here. Don't hold me to the number, but I think it's 250 degrees. I'm not sure, maybe 290, but it could be one of those two, is the test temperature. So you take 5W30 and straight 30, put them in a heater and run them up to the test temperature, let's just call it 250, and pour them out. Again, the characteristics should be identical as far as viscosity goes. So what you're doing, this is why they call them multi-grade oils or multi-weight. See, even the industry tends to use weight. Go ahead.
Well, see, and that's the question I had leading up to this, is that when the engine is cold, you talk about the oil being thicker. Because technically, to me, it's going to be thicker because it's not a temperature.
It is, but you can...
So why would the 5W30 being a lower viscosity and run easier, why would the more cushioning happen at colder startups than it would if it was at 30? Because wouldn't inherently, once it got to operating temperature...
You're mixing the viscosity numbers with the actual temperature.
Okay.
5 weight is still viscous.
You're right.
Cold.
Okay.
Well, no, that's a very good question. It's going to behave like a cold 5W oil, and it's going to behave hot like a 30W oil, straight grades. So what you're doing is you're saying, okay, I want to start with a real thin oil. That'd be way too thin to run hot, but it's really pretty good cold. So I'm going to use that characteristics for my cold. But up here, when the engine's really hot, that stuff would drain out. It'd leak at every seal. It'd get past the rings. It'd be a nightmare. But 30W is perfect.
Okay.
And it new. So I want to create a multigrade that has the cold weather flowabilities of the thin oil, but the hot weather handling of the thick stuff.
Okay.
And they can do that with admixtures and careful mixing, and that's where the multi-grades are. So what you're doing is in that hotter zone at low pump speeds, your 30 weight just isn't quite thick enough to keep the bearing floating. Now, once you get a little bit of revs up and you build up some flow, you got cushioning because you're not knocking, okay? Right. It's just in that one little realm. Well, the oil stock is basically the same, whether it's a multigrade 530 or 540 or even 550, okay? If you could get a 550. I don't think you can go. I think it's usually 2050 because you got to trade off something somewhere. So basically, in your case, though, 540 is available.
All right.
And it should cost you no more, but it should provide that little bit of additional cushioning
at low revs.
Because now it may not. It could also be harder for the pump to pump. But in theory, if what I'm guessing is correct based on the 15-minute discussion we had, yeah, your pump will actually behave better because pumps have clearances too. And if the oil gets a little thinner and the pump has a little more clearance, actually it's not even that the oil gets thinner, the oil thins down to its design capability, but the pump has a little more looseness so it can't develop the pressure. And then the rods have a little more end play and a little more gap so that there's more places for the less oil to leak out of.
Right.
You end up with an equation of I got more holes than I have water coming in or oil coming in. If we thicken up the oil just a little bit, okay, the pump gets a better bite on it. It can handle it. It has less leakage and byproducts, so it produces a higher flow rate at lower RPMs. And the bearing, it won't leak out quite as quickly and might give you a little more cushioning.
Okay.
And it's a pretty cheap thing to test. In fact, it was interesting that the website that we looked at said, hey, in some circumstances, a thicker oil can be used to compensate for increased bearing tolerances and clearances, gaps being between bearing and rotating shaft that had developed over the years. Now, large changes can be poor lubrication. In other words, it leaks out.
Right.
But they're saying these small changes to help you. First off, we're in Florida most of the time, so your motor runs hot, and hotter ways that the thermostat and the temperature gauge don't tell you. All right. A lot of an engine's cooling, in fact, some engineering journals tell you more cooling happens through the oil than through the radiator.
Yeah, we actually just talked about this when we did a cooling woes on the Jeep, and you mentioned that oil, again, it's a cooking
oil
woe.
is in direct contact with the
everything.
hot surfaces.
There's no cooling passages in a piston.
No. So there's a lot of heat. So your oil is actually running hotter than what your gauge claims. And you've had firsthand experience with that with your transmission issues, with the fact that the transmission cooler is inside your radiator. And you were having overheats in your JKU. And you're like, I've checked the timing. I've checked the fuel flow. I've checked everything. Why is my engine overheating? And the answer came back, plug in your little programmer and read your transmission temperature. It's not your engine that was overheating.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad. I mean, it was cool. The programmer showed me the surface of the earth or the sun.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, that can't be good.
Yeah. And so that's another case, though, because why did your transmission slip, Scott?
Yeah, well, because the fluid was at 400.
Yeah, I get that.
I have no idea.
But no. And what happens when you heat oils? The viscosity drops. It gets thinner. When it gets thinner, it actually lubricates better. Think about that. You thin it down, it can get into more nooks and crannies. But your plates need a certain amount of friction to work in an automatic transmission. Your clutches are wet. And if you make the oil lube even better, you start slipping plates.
Which sounds counterproductive.
Which builds heat, which makes them slip, which means you don't go up the hill to the driveway.
Pull over the hot oil light blinking. By the way, since we're on that subject real quickly, the hot oil light, we see this a lot in the JKU world. Hot oil does not mean, and first people go, well, I just had an oil change. My engine coolant temp's at 209 degrees. Hot oil is the transmission. So you put it in neutral. If you read the owner's manual, please, you'll see it says put the Jeep in neutral. Again, for 2011.
Keep it running. Don't shut it down.
For JLs and newer JKs, I'm not sure, but for
Read your
2011,
instructions.
put it in neutral. And then put your foot on the brake, obviously, and rev the engine to like 1,500 RPM to pump that fluid through the cooler.
And it'll cool down pretty quickly.
And it'll cool down relatively quickly, yeah. So, again, that's why I love my Trail Dash 2, because it now, at least in the older JKs, gave me a transmission temperature. Now, again, some of the newer JKs and JLs have a transmission temperature gauge, so you can keep an eye on it. But, again, keep an eye on that. That is a cooling situation, and you do not want to be stuck anywhere with a burnt-up transmission.
Right. Now, I will, in all fairness, for disclosure, for those of you who go to the Valvoline.com site, it will tell you, and the question is asked, is it okay to use a 530 in a car where the owner manual calls for 520, and it says they don't recommend you doing that. Yet, 2 paragraphs down, it talks about just doing that in certain situations.
Yeah.
Don't think that is the right answer in general. In general, you should follow your manufacturer's recommended oils and change them at the frequency that they tell you to, as well as change the filter. In fact, I probably overchange because most of the older books say do it every other oil change. I do it just every oil change because a clean filter can't hurt anything.
Well, and not only that, I use OEM filters. I know everyone says, oh, you're wasting your money. Well, I've always had luck. Never had a problem with the OEM filter, but when he talks about putting the 5W, it actually says in there, can you use 5W30 and an owner's manual calls for 520? Here's an asterisk for me personally. For me personally. And here's the deal. When I first got the JK, I know they use that same 3.8 minivan motor and a bunch of other vehicles that call for 530. I'm going to beat the snot out of this Jeep. And I knew that from the get-go. So I checked some forums, and everyone says I run 530 all day long because the 5W20 is for the fuel mileage aspect. Because when we talked about this, you
There's
said
a lot about that.
Yeah, where the starter motor
Has to crank over the
over
cold
oil.
components with the cold oil that's more viscous, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It's a calculated risk. I knew the oil journals are the same, but I am basically sacrificing some aspects of fuel mileage, negligible.
Right.
Other items may wear faster, but I chose to use 5W30. And as a matter of fact,
this is in his JKU.
JKU. I got to give the guys over at Jerry a shout out because they did great by my oil change. Thank you guys. And again, occasionally I throw some love to everyone. And I didn't even think about it. I had them put the 5W20 motor oil in it at 114,000 miles.
Oopsie.
Dory's starting her Jeep up, 3,000 miles into the oil change, and this thing sounds terrible. I'm like, wow, man, that thing's ticking a lot. Check the oil. Yeah, I got plenty of oil with it. Oh.
Oopsie.
And again, the guys at Jerry did a great job. I love them to death, but I had to call Carlos, a service manager, and say, can you tell the 300-pound guy that tightened my drain plug above 120 on the foot-pound torque wrench? I had to go over 120 to get it off.
At least you got it off and didn't snap.
I got it off. So, me, I'm a big proponent of, hey, the dealership does it. Yeah. I told them that was a no-no.
Yeah.
But other than that, everything was fine. They took care of all the service. But again, once I put the 5W30 back in, she quieted it down. Yeah. So I know that I took calculated risk.
Yeah. And if you have additional clearances, you can intelligently work with it. But this is all about doing your research.
Yeah.
Okay. Looking into what's there, not just on public media forums, but look at technical. Most manufacturers now publish lots and lots of good technical information that you can help yourself to make intelligent decisions. And quite frankly, you don't really need to make it in big jumps. If you're doing something like changing your oil, do it one grade step. Don't automatically jump to the, don't go putting 90-weight gear lube in going, this will fix it.
Oh man, it's funny. I actually conversation.
We used to
at
have
work.
that. There was an old product in the back when I was younger that unscrupulous used car dealers were known for using, and it was called Motor Honey.
I sold that stuff to the by the case,
and you'd pour that in there, and you'd crank, and the pour started reading. And you'd be like, see, doesn't leak a drop. Got great oil pressure. No, you're not. That's not oil pressure. That's grease pressure.
My stepdad to this day, I love him. He worked for an unscrupulous car dealership, and I wish I was joking about this. He has cut the tongue of his shoe off his work boot, the leather work boot, on a car going to auction, and used that as a main bearing to get the knock to go away when it had 80-90 gear oil in it.
And still knocking.
Then barely.
Yeah.
And then, buff the outside with transmission fluid to get the car to go through auction.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, there's still people like that today, but that isn't the right way.
He doesn't work there anymore, guys.
But you do make your adjustments in small increments and test it in between. When you do everything at once, you don't know what's wrong when it doesn't work, and you don't know what adjustment was too far, too little.
Yeah.
So, but yes, it takes more time, but you're usually happier with the results.
It's funny you said Motor Honey, because when I did the oil change in the Jeep and I'm putting the big bottle of blue STP in there, they're like, man, that's like Motor Honey. I'm like, no, not the same.
Not the same.
This is zinc.
Yeah, primarily you were adding it for the zinc additives. And, talking about that, for those of you that don't know, zinc used to be a very common motor oil additive in what was shipped out in every major brand. And that right along with tetraethyl lead that was in gasolines.
Yeah.
And some of you may know that they pulled lead out of gasoline because it was bad for us breathing the atmosphere.
Yeah,
and
the
whatnot.
darn bald eagles.
But it did perform something in the engine. It lubricated the valve seats and the valves, particularly the exhaust valves, and prevented them from doing what they call seat recession, which is the hammering of the valve and the high temperatures basically erodes the seat, and the valve slowly gets lower and lower and lower and lower until
it was a good call.
Doesn't run. And done for the best reasons in the world. So they come out now with hardened valve seats and hardened valves. Same thing with the zinc. Zinc in the oil, it wasn't heavily toxic, but it was toxic enough, particularly when it was leaked into combustion chamber in older cars and in the blue smokers. You really don't need to be inhaling zinc particulate in the air you're breathing. And
it also wreaked havoc on the catalytic converters too.
It really did. It trashed the catalytic converters. So it was kind of downplayed and removed. Issue with that was the primary lubricant, the zinc itself, in the flat lifters. The bottoms of the lifters against the cam, and so we started to see this. Lifter wear and or camshaft wear until the manufacturers changed over to either nitrite coated cams and lifters, or went to a lot of manufacturers said, you know what, let's take a trick from the hot rodders, and they put roller cams in a lot of things now.
Yeah.
And a lot of engines now come stock with roller cams. Well, if you have the older engines, like the 4-liter straight 6,
born in the 50s,
you still have hydraulic flat lifters with a regular cam. If you're lucky, your cam's been hardened. And if you're not, you probably aren't driving it. But Scott is adding zinc back into the oil additives to add for that rubbing wear lubricity. So
it's not going to fix damage. It's going to prolong me having to go. And we joke about the mechanic in the can.
Yeah.
But one of the things that other people have said in the forums is to go to a diesel oil, like a Rotella. But I'm kind of really iffy about that.
Well, actually, Rotella is fine in most cases.
That's a popular item in the forums.
It's high zinc. It's high pressure. It's also expensive. Got to remember, I run 4 gallons of that stuff in my tow rig.
Yeah, I know. The Brinks truck's delivering it now.
Yeah, yep. And then, of course, getting rid of it is always fun, too, because it's 4 gallons to haul away. Mm-hmm. But I know a lot of people that do it. The thing is, the gradations are not exactly matching. You'd have to do some research to make sure what diesel oil is compatible with the grades that you want, or you may end up with that same issue again on the starter going...
Please no more.
You got to remember, we're talking about pressures in an engine whose compression is upwards of 20 to 1 versus 8 to 9 to 1.
Yeah.
So your bearing clearances, the older diesel oils were more straight grade related. They were multi-grade, but very slightly multi-graded. Diesel engines really didn't have cold starts that often. They were left to idle to stay warm.
Yeah.
The tolerances were a little looser because of the temperature gains. When you're pulling hard on a hill, putting 40 pounds of boost in that, you generate a lot of heat. So your bearings have to be able to expand without scuffing. So, there's a whole different world. There's also a much, much, much higher soot production that the oil has to handle from a diesel.
Right.
I mean, if you've ever looked at the oil on a diesel, it comes out golden honey when you first put in the can and then drive around the block, come back and go, wait a minute, turn black.
Yeah.
So
You told me about that.
it's that quick. So, yeah, I know people that do it with caution. I mean, it's good oil. It has to be good oil to take the high compression diesels, but it is not a straight 1-for-1.
I had a friend of mine with a 94 Tercel. He had a bad valve stem oil leak, and someone said, use aircraft oil. So he bought, I think, a Shell aircraft oil, poured it in there, and it worked. Hands to goodness, it worked. But when he finally got on to leave a light, hell hath no fury. Like something's been leaking quietly with aircraft oil.
Yes.
I did not want to be behind him.
No, you did not. That was my thought, is aircraft oil is designed to flow in every nook and cranny because you can't stop and pull over and add lubricant. What? No.
No. But real quick, I'm going to jump into the garage if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Because we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back after this message from someone.
Hey, folks, it's Kevin. Since Scott's doing other things right now, I just wanted to remind you that we are part of the 4x4 Radio Network. Please take the time to check out our other shows. Scott he's back. He'll tell you what the other shows are.
4x4 podcast, Center Steer podcast, the Trail Chasers, the Jeep Talk Show, and On the Trail with Kevin and Scott, because that's our main flagship show for us. Hi.
And with that, back to the garage.
Hey, Kevin, quick question now.
Yep.
Since we're going to flow into this cold, I have two questions for the garage segment. I know you can answer because speaking of the diesel oil, I asked you one time, a long time ago, I'm like, what's the interval about changing oils? And you said, well, I do it when the light comes on, yada, yada, yada. And I said, well, why not change it every 5,000 miles? And that's when you kind of gave me that stern father-like look where you said, Scott, the oil is a finite resource. Manufacturers and people have said, this is when you change your oil.
And now who has the biggest risk?
The manufacturers.
The manufacturers. They write a warranty on that engine.
Yeah.
They typically take the...
Click on motorcycle.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I'm going to leave this in because we're doing...
He jumped up. We still have the Valvoline side up. Valvoline side.
But as you're saying, they have the biggest risk for information.
For the failures. And so what they'll do is they know what a reasonable change would be based on average usage. Well, their warranty doesn't deal in average. Their warranty is in black and white. You got a little book that's got your warranty written down in it.
Yeah. But no one reads that thing.
Well, lawyers do, and lawyers are the ones who come into play when you try to take your Jeep back after you blew the engine apart because you never changed the oil, and you're saying it's a manufacturer's defect.
Lack of maintenance is not that.
I know. So the gist of it is oil change intervals, both those in the book and those that are programmed into the auto sensors, are extremely conservative. And that's not a bad thing.
Right.
So arbitrarily splitting that in half and doing it double the frequency really is just wasting your money and the resource of oil, which is a limited resource. Now, unless you're dealing in synthetics, which are man-made, but it still has the environmental impact of waste oil. So I see no real reason to accelerate your oil change intervals unless, and of course there's always a caveat, you are a extreme hard user. And guess what? The manufacturers tell you what the definition of a hard use is.
Dusty, dirty environments, cold or heat, extreme towing.
Yeah. Where you're stressing it really, really hard, then they give you a new interval. And again, they're basically putting their reputation. I think that's what I was struggling with. Reputation on the line, saying that, okay, if you work it really hard, but you change the oil this much, we're warranting that it'll work and survive. So beyond those, there's really little reason other than certain companies' marketing strategy to get you to spend a lot of your money for them.
And we can thank that little squirrely Q thing for that.
We can. And, okay, I get it. It was a neat marketing ploy. But you know that up until the time that marketing ploy came on trying to tell everybody every 3,000 miles, most oil change intervals were 7,000 to 7,500.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was with warranty. Now, manufacturers turned around and said, hey, if everybody's going to do it, we'll go ahead and change the warranty. So thank you to that company for changing the warranties. Now, there's been a little bit of a backslide because some of the environmental people said, wait a minute, how come, all of a sudden we got to change the oil more often from a manufacturer's recommended, not a choice.
Right.
And they've kind of backed off. And I'm now seeing 5,000 and 6,000 miles coming back. And
well, that's one of the things we talked about with the financial department, about how the rotors are basically at bare minimums from the get-go. A lot of manufacturers, including the premium automobile I work for, they've gone back to 10,000-mile oil changes. Because they want the vehicle to be more user friendly to you, so you're not stuck in the garage every 3,000 miles sitting there spending $45 of your hard-earned money for a premium automobile. Well, no, this thing can go 10,000 miles without an oil change.
Yeah, and now you're getting up close to what? Good Lord, sorry about this. 45 years ago when I did my thesis.
That's my next question I was going to ask.
Some of the initial reports from Mobil One, who granted me some papers back then, were that, their oil in some tests, okay, this was not an average, this was just some tests, was lasting upwards of 20,000 miles.
Yeah.
And they were saying averages, they were happy with 14,000 miles between changes. Oddly enough, I've noticed that they have some extended life versions of Mobil One that say
10,000 miles.
10,000 miles between changes. And folks, the failure of motor oil is twofold. There's two ways. One, the contaminant load. When they are loaded with contaminants, they no longer perform their job. They're not picking up more contaminants. Basically, the vacuum cleaner bag is full, all right? And you can vacuum all you want, and you're not going to pick up any more dirt. And if you leave the dirt in the oil, you're going to have bearing failures. The other failure mode is breakdown of the oil. Now, in synthetics, you've almost got that beat. It's very hard to break down synthetics.
Cylinder wash from fuel getting past the rings.
No, I'm talking about breakdown the physical molecules of the oil strands. You've seen every engine that comes apart that's got sludge to the point that the valve rocker, valve cover and the rockers are just goop. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's oil. Oil's a long chain polymer molecule of hydrocarbons. Okay. And that's why the same goop that comes out of the ground can make gasoline, can make diesel fuel, can make kerosene. It can
cold slaw, new slaw, mother and slaw.
Right. It's because it's the length of the chain.
Right.
The longer the chain, the thinner the material, the more it can move around, but also the easier it breaks. And when it breaks, you get energy out, i.e. combustion. So you take oil, which is considered a mid-function of the oil spectrum, and subject it to heat and pressure, and I don't know where you'd find that in an engine, and particularly at flaws, like it's hydrogen, carbon in a certain shape, and every once in a while you'll get a flaw, like a chlorine atom or sulfur atom or something like that kind of puts a kink in the chain.
Yeah.
Guess where the chain breaks?
At its weakest link.
At the weakest link, at the kink. Well, now what do you got? You got two shorter chains, right?
Right.
If you're lucky. Guess what that is? Thicker. The shorter the chains, the thicker, till you end up with sludge. Okay. Tar, which we drive on every day, is oil.
Right.
It's just a really short frickin' chain that packs together and goes solid at room temperature.
So some of the videos we see where like a yellow bottle with a Liberty Bell on the front of it, or Quaker sludge, they've got bad reps because they were a paraffin-based waxed. That really wasn't the oil's fault. That was lack of maintenance and stuff like that.
That's all that was. There's some people that say dyno oil is good. Okay. Paraffin is just a petroleum wax is all that is. And the difference on the feedstock, as they call it in the industry, depending on the type of oil, they call it sweet crude, heavy crude, and that kind of stuff.
Spicy crude.
Well, I don't know about spicy crude, but
that was my dancer name in college.
It's how the stock reacts over time to heat and pressure.
Okay.
And some stocks broke down. They might lubricate better, but they broke down more quickly. Other ones didn't lubricate as good, but they lasted forever, And so depending on the engine you put it in, if you put in a drag strip, which a blown funny car, let's say, you'd use that better lubrication, and I didn't care if it broke down quicker because I'd tear the engine down after every 2 races or 3 races.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the guys out there who park the farm equipment that may have 30 thousandths bearing gap from the factory. I want it thicker and I want to last forever because I only go out and fire that thing up 3 times a year, and they were happier with this other type of oil that might be thicker and heavier. They all had their place.
They all did their research.
Now we're looking at the world where we're starting to homogenize. Oil is oil, and it still isn't. I mean, I got news for you folks. When you go out there's a lot of game playing that you can do as far as what they're going to try and sell you as an oil. I personally think it's better to do research. The biggest thing that's common is your designations on your oils. The
API
service index. If it meets or exceeds the API service index, now you're on a consistent playing field, because they do things like shear test, load capability, lubricity under pressure.
All that can be found in your owner's manual.
It can. So if you match up the APIs and stick with that, and you'll be surprised when you go look at some of the cut rate oils.
Nope.
Don't have that sticker on them.
And I'm glad you said that, because we had a Velociraptorsaurus Rex, a Hyundai Velociter, and turbocharged. The person used the wrong oil. And I got to see firsthand how it trashes an engine main bearing when the wrong oil is used.
It rolls up the bearing material, doesn't it?
It looks gross. But, so needless to say, new engine later, because not only did it trash the main bearings, trash turbocharger, but you know what? He saved $5 a quart by buying the cheaper oil.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. So, that's just one of my personal things is, there are places to cut corners on your vehicle if you have to.
Oil's not one
of them. That literally is the lifeblood of your engine.
Real quickly, though, one of the things on the reason why I had you click on it here, so if you notice the pause earlier, it talks about recycled motor oils. I'm seeing a lot more of this, and it basically, you can check out Valvoline.com, has all the information, but to paraphrase, it says, is recycled motor oil better for the environment than non-recycled motor oil? Yes, by recycling the motor oil, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but one of the main questions I asked is Valvoline recycled motor oil just dirty oil that has been cleaned? And no, they're using refining processes, so you're not just getting that.
All right, let's, no pun intended, boil it down to the basic facts.
Yes,
there's 2 kinds of recycling for oils out there. One is filtration, and that's what a lot of the cheaper recycled oil are. They basically, I don't care how far down the recycling is, there's particles that are smaller than the screen, filter, paper, material, media, and it gets through.
In reverse, you may have the biggest, baddest Jeep, but there's always a bigger, badder Jeep.
Right.
In reverse.
So here you're looking at the fact that filtered oils are less expensive, but they're also, then they come back in and add additional additives and things to replenish the performance stock. But they're usually darker colored oils. Now, what they're talking about here in the Valvoline Next Gen, and again, this is just their website, but I've also been through this.
There's a lot of brands out there.
When they say re-refined, and that's a specific term. Oil is gotten out of crude oil by fractional distillation. You basically heat the crude till it melts down to a goo and starts to boil. And what's coming off isn't water vapors, it's oil vapors. And they go up these big towers. I'm sure you've all seen them on TV. If you not, look up a...
frac towers.
Well, frac's a little different. Frac is what you do with the residue, and you're cracking them again to do the same thing. But it's just a distillation tower. And it's very controlled heat. And there's pans with little bubblers in them. And the vapor comes up through the bubbler, bubbles through the liquid that collects on this pan at this temperature. And the next temperature is a little cooler. And the next temperature is a little cooler. And so the lightest vapors... go up and condense out at the highest pans. So gasoline is really high up that distillation tower. Engine oils are a bit lower. Heavy oils like the
gear oil.
Yeah, the gear oil and the
Hydraulic
heavy diesel,
oil.
Bunker oil, and those things. I was trying to think of bunker oil you see in the big ships and that stuff. It settles out even lower. So that's how they fractionally distill. Well, the neat thing about boiling, this is why they use it to purify really bad water, is when you boil water, steam is water.
It's not junk. It's
It's
water.
not the hard particulates. Now, sometimes there may be some other volatile gases that come off, but in fractional distillation, those gases go off to another table. So you can get some pretty pure oil with definitely no solids come with it. So when you have recycled motor oil that has been re-refined, not just filtered and additives, you're basically saving all the good part and ditching all the bad parts. So there's nothing wrong if they want to go with a recycled oil, just
Right.
used oil that's been filtered. Well, I'll just say I wouldn't put it in my Jeep. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, but if it's been
Refined. Yeah.
then that's a different story. So look for that label. Again, we talk about do your research.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
re-refined can save you a few bucks, and yes, it's a little easier on the environment. The thing is a lot of re-refined stock is so good that it just goes back in as new oil.
Yeah. Well, real quick question. I'm glad you talked about fracking and all the. Let's boil this down to basics, Kevin.
Oh.
Okay.
Nice pun.
Thank you. Oil.
Yeah.
What do you prefer? Do you prefer synthetics, dyno oils, or do you prefer the blends? If you had to guess.
I typically run the synthetics only because of what I do to the oil. I want that extra heat resistance and that extra stress resistance in what I do with my engines and my vehicles.
Yeah. What about the high mileage oils?
I am paying. They're really just increased viscosities.
Okay.
They're just the same thing as we're talking about in yours, which would be another option, is to run a high mileage oil in your.
Already doing it.
Okay. Well, it's not quite the same as a full grade. But that's really high mileage oils include a few other things in there to help keep seals conditioned and lubricated and maybe swell them just a little bit so that they seal up a little bit better. But anyhow, I typically run synthetic. I'm not afraid to run regular oils, but I do know that they're easier to break down. And so when I have to run because of a situation, maybe I can't get my synthetic brands that I prefer for some reason, and I have no problem putting the same grade of dyno oil in. I just move up my service cycle a little bit because I know it's going to break down a little more, create a little more sludge. So I want to make sure that before the oil's sludge carrying capability and the filter's capture capabilities are exceeded, I want to change. So that's really what you're doing. Your oil is cooling, cleaning, lubricating, and corrosion preventing.
Yeah. So
all of that plays into the choices of oil. The other thing is oil has to deal with water. Water is a natural vapor, that's going to occur, particularly here in Florida in the summer. We have very high humidities. The start and stop cycle, you tend to get condensation in your crankcase. Unfortunately, the combustion byproducts, if the oil doesn't capture them and get rid of them or actually encapsulate them, and you don't change the oil to get rid of it, that vapor reacts with those contaminants and forms acids.
Yeah.
And they eat up the inside of your vehicle in kind of weird little ways. Everybody says, oh, well, it's a big cast iron lump. No. I'm talking about your layer of hardening on your camshafts is microns thick. The acid will eat through that and break down that hardened layer. Your piston walls and your pistons that have the anti-scuff skirts, it will eat away at the scuff skirts. It will accelerate metallic corrosion between dissimilar metals. So, I actually change my oil more frequently in the summer because I know it's a harsher environment. And I like the fact that most synthetics, I'm not a brand fanatic other than my diesel, most synthetics have slightly better dispersant characteristics. They call it cleaning and dispersants, where they take the debris that occurs as a byproduct of combustion, break it down. I'm sure you've seen that little Petri dish thing where they sprinkle the little black carbon dots in it out of an engine, and it kind of spreads out. It looks like a detergent commercial from Dawn dishwashing liquid, and they have slightly better characteristics because there are no weak links in the chain. It's not really fixing itself. It's not cleaning up after itself. Now, I got to qualify with one last thing. It doesn't mean that synthetics are bulletproof. You can break a synthetic oil chain as well, and it does happen if you run it too hot, too long, too hard.
Yes.
All oils will fail eventually, and they do. that's why you change them regularly along with the filter.
Well, an actual automotive brand with a propeller on the side that's 3 little letters gets a bad rap because people push hard, and they have a long service interval, and a lot of times corners are cut, and we always get one of those cars in that has a bunch of oil leaks, sent to auction because they pushed too hard, they probably overheated, and they
didn't maintain it.
But I think that's enough for there. I'm going to go ahead and shut the garage door if that's cool with you.
Sounds good. Cool.
Things work so much better when you have the remote and the proper battery in it. Mm-hmm. So with that, Kevin, anything else you want to touch about the oil subject? Or
no, I mean, there's 1,001 questions that people can ask about oils, and it's such a critical component to your engine's performance. As we've said before, I don't skimp out on it,
Yeah.
And, if you, any of our listeners, our Patreons, you have a specific question, go ahead and email us that question. Either send it to us on Facebook or email us at
onthetrailpodcast@gmail.com. We appreciate all the emails we've been getting lately, by the way.
We really do. And so that would, and I'll take the time to look it up and see if I can give you some kind of a feedback. Actually, I did think of one last little tidbit on oils.
Go ahead.
And I've actually mentioned this before. And it's not about the oil itself. It's about what people do with the oil. Mm-hmm. When you're done servicing and collecting your used oils, please take it to a recycling center. Oil poured on the ground does not stay still.
No.
Okay, it flows and it continues to drip down through your soil types. It's not a healthy thing whatsoever. Yeah, you could try and tell me that it's biodegradable, and I'll tell you, well, yeah, the dead dinosaurs and actually the sea algae and all the other life that created the oil beds.
Yeah.
How many millions of years did that take? Okay.
It came out of the ground. It can go back.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of people's philosophy, but it contaminates wells. It kills plants. It's toxic to ground fauna, basically the worms and the bugs and everything that help keep the soil healthy. So please don't say it'll treat my ground for termites. Yeah, it'll kill the termites and everything else, as well as possibly your well.
And you and your pets.
Please just take it to a recycling center. Almost every state has laws that if they sell oil, they have to take waste oil.
And bring it in during business hours. Do not crop dust, i.e. leave it at the front doorstep.
Yeah, please don't do that. Just take it in there. And then the last one, I think I mentioned this 2 shows ago or 3 shows ago.
Yeah, the Christmas show.
Yeah.
December 1st.
No, I was talking about, be careful what jugs you put it in. Yeah. I found out that warm oil, not really hot, I can handle warm oil going into most of the blown polyethylene jugs like you might have with kitty litter, floor cleaners, milk jugs, and that kind of stuff. Is very temperature sensitive.
Yeah. All of a sudden the handle goes like a Dr. Seuss, like, whoa.
And you're like, okay, quick, give me a garden hose. I'm going to cool the outside of this until everything's cold enough that the jug hardens again. Yeah. I invested, like I said, in an inexpensive Carboy 5 gallons at Amazon, and it's great. My little drain pans, it has this funnel spout on the end, pours right into that. Once it gets up to 5 gallons, it doesn't matter the temperature. It's a high temperature unit.
Yep.
It's sealed, so I can actually put it in the back of the Jeep and not worry about oil rings on the floor. Mm-hmm. Drive down,
drop it off,
open up the vent valve, pour it in, let it drain for a minute, chat with the guy in the back where the button is, and they're usually kind of bored anyway, sitting at the computer.
Yeah.
And then wipe up, close it up, go home, and ready for the next one.
Exactly. Well, I think that's enough talking. I think it's time we lock some hubs and put the Jeep in 4-wheel drive. What do you think?
I agree. So, as we've always said before, when you're leaving the trails,
please take your nothing but memories, pictures, and your trash
when you leave the trail. Hey, I'll maybe doing it next time. He's finally got it right.
Absolutely. Yay, go me. So with that, again, thank you for everything. Check out our Patreon page, YouTube page.
And again, don't forget to have a happy new year. 2020 is a fresh start.
Exactly. Later, guys.
Bye.
Proceeding has been provided for entertainment only. Proper service and repair procedures are vital to the safe, reliable operation of all motor vehicles, as well as personal safety of those performing those repairs. Standard safety procedures and precautions, including the use of safety goggles and proper tools and equipment, should be followed at all times to eliminate the possibility of personal injury or improper service which could damage the vehicle or compromise its safety.
What he said. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
This has been a Bent Axle Media production.